The fire began with no warning, a lonely freight car burning on the forgotten rails of Montana. Inside, two little sisters lay bound and silent, their cries smothered by smoke and steel. Officer Cole Bennett wasn't meant to be there that night, just a man and his dog, Coda, chasing routine beneath the stars. But fate has its own patrol routes. When Coda caught the scent of fear in the wind, the night turned into a race against fire and time. What they found inside that iron tomb would uncover a secret far darker than the flames themselves, and prove that sometimes the bravest hearts walk on four legs. The wind came down from the Bitterroot Mountains like a living thing, sharp enough to sting the skin and thick with the scent of iron and pine. The town of Bitterroot, Montana, huddled in the valley below, a scatter of aging houses and rusted silos where smoke curled from chimneys like whispers of a forgotten time. Beyond the town stretched the abandoned freight yard, a graveyard of steel and silence. The tracks there hadn't seen a real train in years, only ghosts that creaked when the wind shifted and metal that groaned as if mourning its own decay. Officer Cole Bennett had patrolled these rails for almost a decade, long enough to know every bend of the tracks, every hollow echo that the wind carried through the ravine. He was 37, tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of man whose presence filled a room without effort. His jaw was square, shadowed by the rough edge of stubble that refused to be tamed. Faint scars nicked the line of his cheek, remnants of a past life in the Marine Corps before the uniform turned from camouflage to blue. His hair, once the color of dark wheat, had begun to pale at the edges, dusted with silver that caught the dusk light. Cole's face carried the look of a man who had seen too much and chosen silence as his companion. Since his wife's death 5 winters ago, that silence had hardened into habit. His partner trotted ahead, a German shepherd named Coda, 6 years old, sable-coated with a black saddle pattern running down his back and amber eyes that gleamed like polished brass. Coda was the department's most reliable K9, lean, disciplined, and alert, with the restrained grace of a soldier. He'd been with Cole since puppyhood, trained not just by commands but by the unspoken language between two souls who had learned to depend on each other. Coda's gait was steady as the wind pressed through the weeds beside the tracks, but every now and then his ears flicked at the faintest sounds, a snapping twig, a whisper of air through metal. The partnership between them was old and wordless. Cole didn't need to speak to know when the dog sensed something wrong. The set of Coda's shoulders was enough. The sun was a dull red disk sinking behind the mountains, staining the clouds with the color of rust. The air tasted of cold metal and distant wood smoke. Cole adjusted the collar of his jacket, his breath fogging as he walked the narrow service path beside the rails. He carried a flashlight in one hand and a memory in the other, the echo of a night, years ago, when a different call had led him to find a family trapped inside a burned-out pickup on the highway. He'd pulled one child out alive that night, and the scream of the other still sometimes woke him before dawn. That was the night he stopped believing in coincidences. Since then, whenever the air turned strange, he listened. Tonight, the air was strange. The wind that normally smelled of sage and frost carried something acrid, something that bit the back of his throat. Coda froze first. The dog's body stiffened, tail lowering, nose lifted to the wind. A low growl rolled from his chest, not the warning bark of curiosity, but the deep, vibrating sound of recognition. Cole halted instantly, scanning the dark ahead. His gloved hand went to the flashlight, beam cutting through the gloom in a thin white blade. It caught the outline of something ahead on the spur line. A boxcar, old and mottled with rust, sitting crooked on the rails like a broken tooth in a jaw of steel. Cole frowned. That car hadn't been there last week. The railway company hadn't operated this spur in over a year. He glanced down at Coda, whose ears stood sharp as knives. "You smell something?" he murmured. Coda's nose twitched, his gaze locked on the car. Then, without warning, the shepherd let out a sharp bark and bounded forward. Cole followed, boots crunching against the gravel, his breath clouding in the cold. As he drew closer, the wind shifted, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of smoke, not wood smoke, but the bitter, synthetic tang of burning paint and fuel. His stomach tightened. The closer he got, the more the air thickened with heat. He swung the flashlight upward, and the beam caught a flicker of black smoke curling through a crack in the boxcar's sliding door. It rose and twisted into the sky, swallowed by the dusk. For a moment the world narrowed to the hiss of the wind and the faint crackle of something alive inside that car. "Coda, heel," he ordered, voice low but firm. The dog obeyed, though the muscles beneath his fur quivered with tension. Cole stepped to the side of the car, palm brushing against the rusted metal. The heat was faint but real. He could feel the pulse of fire beneath his glove. His chest tightened again, not from fear, but from instinct. He pressed his ear to the steel, and that's when he heard it. A sound muffled but unmistakable, a soft, broken cry. For a second, his brain refused to believe it. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, with no trains running for miles? He pressed closer. The sound came again, a sob, choked and thin, then silence. Cole's pulse kicked hard against his ribs. "God Almighty," he muttered. He stepped back, drawing a breath through clenched teeth. The memory of the highway fire flashed through him, the smell of burning rubber and screams in the dark. Not again. He circled to the latch, tugging it once. It didn't move. The metal handle was warped, fused by heat. "Dispatch, this is Bennett," he said into the radio clipped to his shoulder. Static hissed. "Possible structure fire at the old freight yard, East Spur line. I've got smoke and—" The roar of the explosion still rang in Cole Bennett's ears long after the blast faded into the hollow of the valley. He stood in the freight yard's dying light, the blaze behind him painting the gravel with a wild orange glow. His breath came ragged, lungs burning from the smoke that still lingered in his throat. The air smelled of scorched oil, ash, and something else. Sweet and chemical, the signature of man-made fire. Coda pressed close to his leg, his sable fur streaked with soot, tongue lolling but eyes still sharp, watchful. The German shepherd's chest rose and fell in quick rhythm, his gaze flicking between Cole and the smoldering remains of the boxcar, as if expecting the flames to rise again. The heat painted his eyes gold. The two girls lay on a wool blanket near the patrol truck, small and trembling bundles against the cold Montana air. Their faces were streaked black, their lips pale, but they were breathing. Cole crouched beside them, flashlight beam flicking over their forms. Lily, the elder, her hair a dark chestnut tangled with ash. June, smaller, with curls of gold that caught faint traces of firelight. Both had rope burns circling their wrists and faint bruises along their arms. They were barefoot, their nightclothes torn and soot-stained. Cole pulled his jacket tighter around their shoulders. "Stay with me, girls," he murmured, his voice low and rough. "You're safe now, you hear me? Safe." Lily opened her eyes first. Hazel, wide and stunned, too old for her 8 years. Her voice came as a rasp. Where's Mama?" The words barely formed before she coughed, her small body shuddering. Cole felt the weight of that question press into him. He didn't answer yet. Instead, he reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Bennett. I need paramedics at the Bitterroot Freight Yard, East Spur. 2 minors, female, alive, but showing smoke inhalation and possible trauma. Repeat, urgent response. Static hissed. Then a voice crackled through. Dispatcher Nora Price, one of the few people who still worked night shifts in this quiet town. She was in her early 40s, tall and wiry with red hair always tied into a tight bun, her voice firm as a blade. Copy that, Bennett. Ambulance en route. ETA 12 minutes. Fire crews rolling from Station 2. Sit tight. Cole clicked off, glancing back toward the main road where, in the distance, faint siren wails began to pierce the night. He turned his focus back to the girls. June stirred beside her sister, eyelids fluttering open. Her blue eyes reflected the flashing red from the truck's dash light. She looked around in confusion, then buried her face against Lily's arm. "It's okay," Cole said gently. "You're out. You're safe." He checked their pulses. Thin but steady. Coda sniffed at June's hand, pressing his nose gently against her fingers. The girl blinked and managed a weak smile. "Doggy." "Yeah," Cole said softly. "That's Coda. He's the reason you're breathing." The night deepened around them. Snow flurries began to drift from the dark sky, catching in the glow of the fire. The boxcar's metal sides had collapsed inward, its contents unrecognizable. Cole squinted at the wreckage. There were crates that looked too uniform to be random cargo, their blackened metal hinges identical. Not lumber, not old supplies. Something had been stored there deliberately. Headlights cut through the darkness, and the wail of sirens grew louder until the first emergency truck pulled into the yard, kicking gravel in all directions. Paramedic Dean Hall, a broad man in his late 50s with a belly that belied his speed, jumped out first. His beard was white, trimmed close, his hands steady and scarred from decades of patching up other people's worst nights. His partner, Mara Kim, followed close behind, a young medic with short black hair and quick eyes, half Korean, half Navajo, her face streaked with sweat despite the cold. Both wore reflective jackets that caught the blaze behind them like molten gold. "God almighty," Dean muttered, taking in the burning wreckage. "You pulled them out of that?" Cole nodded, voice hoarse. "Tied up inside. Don't know how long they'd been there." Mara knelt beside the girls, hands gentle but precise as she checked their breathing. "Pulse weak, but they'll make it," she said, flashing her penlight over June's eyes. "Any idea what happened here?" "Not yet," Cole replied. "But this wasn't an accident." Dean glanced at him, brow furrowing beneath his cap. "You smell that?" Cole inhaled, the bitter chemical stench clinging to the air. "Accelerant," he said grimly. "Something industrial. This was lit on purpose." The medics loaded the girls carefully onto stretchers, Coda pacing in circles, as if reluctant to let them out of sight. Cole steadied him with a hand to his collar. "They're okay," he murmured. "Let them do their job." The fire engine arrived next, its lights bathing the rail yard in a wash of red and white. Captain Leonard Reyes, a lean, dark-haired man in his 40s, stepped down, his movements calm and measured. Years in wildfire response had carved him into a man of precision, his every word clipped and purposeful. His olive skin was weathered, his face lined not with age but with discipline. "Bennett," he greeted, voice level despite the chaos. "Heard you pulled 2 kids out of a damn inferno." Cole gave a short nod. "Lucky, not skilled. Another minute and morning came reluctantly to Bitterroot." The fire had burned itself out through the night, leaving the freight yard shrouded in mist that smelled of soot and iron. Frost still clung to the rails, the metal blackened and twisted from the heat. Cole Bennett stood near the ruins, his breath ghosting in the pale air. The sirens were gone now, replaced by the crackling of cooling steel and the occasional hiss, when droplets of dew met embers still hidden beneath the ash. The town's silence felt heavier than usual, as though Bitterroot itself was holding its breath. Coda prowled near the wreckage, his coat dull with soot, nose pressed to the ground. The dog's movements were deliberate, every step a calculation. When he found something, he gave a low grunt, a sound halfway between a growl and a signal, and waited for Cole to approach. Cole's boots sank into the wet gravel as he crouched beside his partner. There, half buried in the ash, was a metal canister. The label melted away, but its smell unmistakable. He pried it open, coughing as the sharp stench of industrial solvent burned his nostrils. "Accelerant," he muttered, "just like I thought." Behind him, the rhythmic scrape of boots announced another presence. Fire investigator Marlon Keene stepped into view, clipboard in hand. He was in his late 40s, tall and lean, his hair the color of charcoal, and his eyes a cold, analytical blue. Deep lines creased the corners of his mouth, not from laughter but from years of seeing what fire left behind. Marlon wore the expression of a man who'd forgotten what surprise felt like. His heavy jacket was stained with soot, and a burn scar, pale against his tan skin, crawled up from his neck to the underside of his jaw. A souvenir from a refinery explosion years ago that had cost him 3 friends. Since then, he worked like a surgeon, methodical and detached, unwilling to let emotion cloud his deductions. "Morning, Bennett," he said flatly. "Heard you pulled 2 kids out of this mess. Brave work." "Lucky work," Cole replied, straightening. "What's your read?" Marlon knelt beside the canister, sniffing lightly before pulling a pair of latex gloves from his pocket. "Accelerant residue, consistent with methyl-based solvent. Burns hot, fast, and leaves this kind of residue." He pointed to the black streaks staining the gravel. "Whoever set this fire knew what they were doing." Cole crossed his arms, eyes narrowing. "Professional?" "Professional or desperate," Marlon said. "Maybe both." He scribbled notes on his clipboard, his handwriting small and precise. "Found fragments of crates with reinforced hinges. Not your average freight contents." Coda gave a sharp bark then, drawing both men's attention. The shepherd stood by the far end of the track, nose low, tail stiff. Cole jogged over, and as he reached him, he saw it. Footprints, large and deep, pressed into the soft soil, leading away from the rails. "Work boots," Cole noted, kneeling for a closer look. "Size 12, maybe 13. Heavy tread. Whoever it was, he wasn't running." Marlon crouched beside him. "Confident. Someone who didn't expect to be followed." He studied the pattern, frowning. "See that? The left heel drags slightly. Old injury, maybe. Limp." Cole nodded. "You sound like you've done this before." Marlon allowed the faintest ghost of a smile. "Only for 20 years. They followed the trail for several yards until it disappeared near the chain-link fence that bordered the yard. There, caught in the wire, fluttered a scrap of paper, edges charred. Cole plucked it free carefully, brushing off ash. The print was smeared but legible enough. "Western Rail Logistics," along with a partial manifest number and a date, 2 days before the fire. Cole's brows furrowed. "Freight company, out of Idaho Falls?" "Yeah," Marlon said, peering at it. "But what's a corporate shipment doing on a decommissioned spur line?" "That's what doesn't fit." Cole folded the receipt and slipped it into a plastic evidence sleeve. His mind turned over possibilities. Illegal transport, smuggling, sabotage. None of them made sense yet. Another figure approached from the road. Deputy Sarah Leland, a woman in her early 30s, short and compact with sharp cheekbones and hair the color of black coffee pulled into a tight ponytail. Her uniform was spotless, her demeanor efficient. Sarah had been with the department 5 years, known for her precision and for rarely smiling. She had once worked in Seattle's police force before a shooting incident left her partner dead and her trust in cities broken. Since moving to Bitterroot, she'd rebuilt her life quietly, one case at a time. "Sheriff Hayes wants your report, Cole," she said briskly, handing him a sealed evidence bag. "And he said to bring whatever you've got. He's not happy about the press sniffing around." Cole glanced at her. "Press? Already?" She shrugged. "Small town. Word travels faster than fire." Her gaze shifted to the burned car, eyes narrowing. "2 kids tied up in there, right?" "Yeah," Cole said softly. "They're alive, thank God." Sarah's jaw clenched. "Then someone wanted them dead bad enough to risk torching half the county." "Or to hide something worse," Cole murmured. The hospital at Bitterroot was a modest brick building perched on the edge of town, the kind of place where winters came early and the smell of antiseptic mixed with pine and snowmelt. The storm had passed, but the night carried its chill through every vent and window pane. Inside room 12, the air was thick with the faint hum of fluorescent lights. 2 small beds sat beneath those pale beams, their sheets drawn up to chins that had only hours ago trembled in firelight. Lily Carter, 8, and her sister June, 6, lay side by side, their faces ghost-pale beneath the hospital's sterile glow. Cole Bennett stood by the doorway, cap in hand, uniform still smelling faintly of smoke. The skin along his right forearm bore a pink patch where the fire had kissed him, and soot still clung to the seams of his jacket. Coda lay at his feet, chin resting between his paws, his amber eyes alert even in stillness. Nurses had tried to coax the dog to wait outside, but Coda had refused in his silent, immovable way, as if he understood that his watch hadn't ended yet. The room's only light flickered slightly as Nurse Margaret Doyle adjusted the IV line beside June's bed. She was a stout woman in her 50s, with silver hair pulled tight into a bun and warm green eyes that carried both exhaustion and kindness. Lines fanned from their corners like creases in old parchment, earned through decades of night shifts and too many stories of loss. "They've had some water," she said quietly, glancing toward Cole. "Still shaken, but talking. I told them you'd be gentle." Cole nodded. "Thank you, Margaret." He moved closer to the bed where Lily was propped up against a pillow. Her small hands gripped the blanket tightly. She stared at him for a long moment before speaking, voice barely above a whisper. "You're the man with the dog." "That's right," Cole said softly. "I'm Officer Bennett, and this here's Coda. He helped find you." Lily reached out a trembling hand, brushing the shepherd's ear. Coda thumped his tail once, slow and deliberate. The gesture made June stir. Her lashes fluttered open, revealing eyes blue as glacier melt. "Doggy stayed with us," she mumbled, half asleep. Cole smiled faintly. "He usually does." Then, more seriously, he drew a small notebook from his coat pocket. "Lily, I need you to tell me what happened last night. Anything you can remember." Lily swallowed, the effort visible in the movement of her thin throat. Her dark hair was tangled against the pillow, the ends singed. "We were playing by the tracks. There's an old freight line behind the mill. We weren't supposed to go that far, but June wanted to see the shiny rocks near the rails." June's voice piped up softly. "They sparkled when the sun hit 'em." Lily nodded, gripping her sister's hand. Then a truck came. Big and loud. 4 men got out. They wore black coats and masks. Not like Halloween ones, real ones. They had boxes. Big gray ones that smelled funny like when Daddy paints the barn. Cole's pen paused. "Like paint thinner?" Lily thought for a moment, then nodded quickly. "Yes, but stronger. It hurt my nose. They were putting the boxes into the old train car. We hid behind the rocks, but one of them saw June's shoes. He yelled, and they ran after us. I tried to hold her hand, but... She stopped, pressing her lips tight, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. Cole leaned in, voice gentle. It's okay, Lily. You're safe now. What happened next? They grabbed us, she whispered. One man said Mama needed to learn a lesson. Then everything went dark. Cole's eyes sharpened. They said that? They mentioned your mother? June nodded weakly, her small fingers curling around her sister's. The tall one said her name. He said Elaine thinks numbers can save her. The officer's jaw tightened. His pen hovered over the page, then dropped back into the notebook. Elaine Carter is your mom? Lily nodded again. She works with trains at the big office where the maps are. Margaret Doyle, who had lingered quietly in the background, looked up at that. Western Rail Logistics, she said softly. Her files with registration, she listed the company for insurance. Been on medical leave for 2 weeks. Cole turned toward her, frowning. Medical leave? Yes, flu complications, they said. But she's been calling in reports, asking about her kids almost every day. Nice woman, polite, always sounded tired. The nurse hesitated, lowering her voice. But yesterday she didn't call. Cole's mind connected the threads with cold precision. Western Rail Logistics, the name on the burned manifest, the same company that owned the boxcar, the same logo he'd seen stamped into the twisted metal he found at the site. He exhaled slowly, fighting the instinctive anger that surged behind his ribs. Someone had used 2 children as leverage. Margaret adjusted the blanket over June's legs. Her voice, the night pressed cold against the valley, the moon shrouded by drifting clouds that turned the mountains into black silhouettes. The convoy moved in silence along the forest road, tires crunching over frost and gravel. Cole Bennett sat in the lead vehicle, eyes narrowed behind the windshield as the headlights cut through the dark. Beside him, Coda sat rigid, tail low, breath fogging the window. The German shepherd's ears flicked with every sound, distant branches cracking, the hum of the engine, his instincts tuned to the tension that filled the car. Up ahead, a sign half swallowed by rust and weeds loomed from the roadside. Mill Creek Switchyard, closed since 2003. Cole studied it as the truck rolled past. The place had once been a central hub for Western Rail Logistics, back when Bitterroot's timber industry still breathed. Now it was little more than a graveyard of derelict freight cars and broken cranes, a maze of rails swallowed by weeds and time. But tonight, it wasn't dead. Lights at the south end, came a voice over the radio. Looks like a warehouse. Generators running. Lieutenant Marla Green sat in the back seat, her gloved hand gripping the radio mic. She was 43, tall and wiry, with short auburn hair tucked under her tactical helmet. Her skin was weathered from years of mountain patrols, and a faint scar traced the left side of her jaw, a reminder from a meth lab explosion 5 winters ago that had nearly taken her life. Marla was the kind of officer who commanded silence without raising her voice. Her reputation was built on precision. No wasted words, no wasted movements. She leaned forward now, her gray eyes catching the faint reflection of steel through the trees. That's our spot. Cole, you and Coda take point. We'll flank both sides. Cole nodded once, his fingers flexing around the grip of his flashlight. The engine cut, leaving the world abruptly hollow. Only the whisper of wind through pine branches remained. The team fanned out, their boots sinking into frozen mud. Somewhere ahead, the faint throb of machinery echoed, rhythmic, mechanical, the sound of pumps feeding a steady flow of something liquid and foul-smelling. The scent hit Cole next. Industrial chemicals, sharp and acidic, strong enough to sting the nose even in the open air. Coda stiffened, nose twitching. A low growl rolled through his chest like distant thunder. "Easy, boy," Cole whispered. "We'll find them." The team crept through the yard, weaving between rusted freight cars that loomed like ghosts under the faint glow of a distant floodlight. The air shimmered with cold vapor. Puddles reflected light in warped silver patches. From one of the side tracks came a faint clang, the swing of a metal door, followed by hushed voices. Cole crouched, pressing his back against an overturned cart, listening. "Shipment needs to move by dawn," a man's voice muttered, low but distinct. "We're already late." Another voice, deeper, older. "Then work faster. We miss the Idaho line. We lose everything." Cole exchanged a look with Marla, who crouched opposite him. Her hand lifted in a silent signal. "Prepare to breach." He nodded. His pulse steadied, slow and deliberate. Training took over. The metal warehouse came into view as they advanced, a low, corrugated structure, its walls reflecting the faint glimmer of a portable floodlight. A single generator thrummed beside it, wires snaking through puddles of oil-streaked water. Through a crack in the half-open door, Cole could see movement. Silhouettes of men loading barrels into crates, sealing them with industrial tape. Marla's voice was a whisper. "3 visible inside, possibly more behind the racks." Cole's reply was a breath. "Let's make it quick." Marla's gaze flicked to her team, 2 tactical officers behind her. Sergeant Frank Dobbins, a burly man in his 50s with a shaved head and thick black beard peppered with gray, and Private Luis Navarro, barely 24, lean and restless, his breath fogging through the scarf around his face. Dobbins was the kind who never flinched under pressure, a former Marine turned deputy after losing his brother to a cartel smuggling case. Navarro, by contrast, was young, his courage still tied to adrenaline, not yet tempered by fear. Marla raised her fist. "On my count," she mouthed. The seconds stretched. The wind shifted, bringing the sound of laughter from inside, harsh, careless. Then her hand dropped. "Go." The door slammed open with a metallic shriek, and chaos erupted. Flashlights cut through the dark like lightning. "Police! Hands where I can see them!" Marla's voice roared. Coda shot forward, a streak of muscle and precision, his bark splitting the air. One of the men near the crates spun in shock, fumbling for a pistol, too slow. Coda slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. Cole moved fast behind him, kicking the weapon away and driving his knee into the man's arm to pin him. Another figure darted toward the back exit. Navarro shouted, firing a warning shot that ricocheted off the wall. The man dropped the crate he was carrying, spilling its contents across the concrete. The smell hit them all at once. Acrid, chemical, wrong. Inside the crate were metal drums, their labels scorched off but faint traces of stencil remained. Hazard Class 6, toxic material. "Jesus," Marla muttered, coughing as vapor rose from the spilled liquid. "These aren't farm supplies." Cole hauled the subdued man upright. His face was gaunt, skin pale under the light, eyes darting with the metallic scent of cold iron clung to the air as midnight settled over Mill Creek Yard. The scene still flickered with the aftermath of the raid. Puddles reflecting emergency lights, the hiss of cooling metal, the faint hum of the generator sputtering its last breath. Cole Bennett crouched behind a stack of drums, scanning the tracks beyond the warehouse. The echo of an approaching train grew louder, deep and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of some massive steel beast rolling out of the dark. He could feel the vibration through the ground before he heard the horn. Lieutenant Marla Green stood near the fence line, radio in hand, her eyes narrowed against the glare of the floodlight. "That's not our transport," she muttered. Schedule says the line's been inactive for years. Cole's gut tightened. Then they're hijacking it. Coda gave a low growl, hackles bristling, his amber eyes fixed on the far end of the yard, where headlights pierced through the fog. The massive freight engine thundered closer, dragging a string of connected cars, most weathered and empty, but two gleamed too clean, too new. Cole's eyes tracked them instinctively. Those were the clean cars, meant to disguise the toxic cargo they'd uncovered. Marla's radio crackled. Sergeant Dobbin's gravelly voice came through. "We've got movement by the east siding. Looks like they're trying to link the new cars to that train." "Copy," Marla replied, voice hard. She turned to Cole. "We can't let them connect those cars. Once that train's moving, it's gone, and whatever's inside will cross 3 states before sunrise." Cole's jaw set. "Then we stop it here." The freight engine screeched as it hit the yard's first junction, the wheels spitting sparks against the frozen rails. Men in dark jackets swarmed from the shadows, waving flashlights and radios. Among them, a tall figure stood out, broad shoulders under a black leather coat, his posture too confident to be a hired hand. Even from a distance, Cole could sense command in the man's stance. "There," he said quietly. "That's our boss." Marla followed his gaze. "We'd take him alive." The team split. Cole and Coda circled toward the control platform, while Marla and Navarro flanked left with Dobbins covering the rear. The night filled with the clatter of steel and shouted orders. Workers scrambled to align the couplings between the cars. One man clambered onto the engine ladder, waving his arm to signal the engineer inside. The brakes hissed, ready to release. Cole sprinted across the gravel, Coda keeping pace. The shepherd's muscles rippled under his sable coat as his paws struck sparks on the metal walkway. "Go!" Cole shouted. Coda surged forward, leaping onto the loading ramp. The nearest gunman turned, startled but too late. The dog's jaws locked onto his sleeve, dragging him down in a flurry of snarls and curses. Cole vaulted onto the platform, one hand gripping the cold steel railing. The brake wheel gleamed beside him, a massive iron disc caked with grease and frost. He twisted it hard, forcing the valve open. Steam burst out, white and violent. The brakes shrieked in protest. Sparks cascaded as the coupling between the second and third cars snapped loose with a deafening clang. The cars behind began to roll backward down the siding, their cargo of poisoned barrels separating from the main line. "Train splitting!" Navarro's voice echoed over the comm. "Cole's cut it!" But the success was short-lived. From the cab of the engine, a flash of light, a gunshot, exploded into the night. The bullet slammed into the metal railing inches from Cole's head. He ducked, returning fire instinctively. The figure in the cab ducked out of sight, cursing. Marla's voice cut through the radio static. "Cole, status." "Still breathing," he grunted, yanking the brake lever again. The train screamed, shuddered, then halted with a groan that seemed to tear the air apart. Cole exhaled, chest heaving. Behind him, Coda barked furiously, dragging another assailant into the gravel. The dog's teeth flashed in the red strobe of the emergency lights, his growl low and relentless. When the man finally stopped resisting, Coda released his hold, standing guard over him until Dobbins moved in with cuffs. Marla approached from the opposite side, gun raised, eyes scanning the shadows. "They're falling back," she shouted. "Not all of them," Cole replied, pointing toward the main track. The man in the black leather coat, the one who had commanded the crew, was backing away toward a parked pickup near the fence. In his hand, a briefcase glinted under the floodlight. Cole didn't hesitate. "Coda, with me!" They sprinted. The man saw them coming and drew his pistol. 2 shots rang out. One ricocheted off the rail, the other tore through Cole's sleeve. He didn't flinch. Coda lunged first, slamming into the man's arm. The weapon clattered to the ground. Cole tackled him next, driving him into the dirt. The man fought back with surprising strength, his gloved fists landing heavy blows. But Cole, fueled by weeks of fury and the image of two frightened girls in a burning train car, overpowered him, wrenching his arm behind his back. The man roared, but the sound turned into a grunt of pain as cold steel clicked shut around his wrists. Marla arrived moments later, weapon still raised. Her voice was steady but edged with triumph. "Name?" Cole pulled back the man's collar. The badge on his belt caught the light, embossed with the corporate logo of Western Rail Logistics. Below it, the name read, Warren Hale, Director of Freight Operations. Cole's lips tightened. "We found our ghost." Hale glared up at him, breath steaming in the cold. His face was square, weathered, the stubble of a man who'd spent more time in offices than outdoors. Yet, there was a hardness in his eyes, the kind that comes from making cruel decisions and never losing sleep over them. "You think you've stopped anything?" he rasped. "There's more trains, more lines. You can't stop." The first light of morning spilled gently over Bitterroot Valley, turning the steel of the railway into ribbons of gold. Frost shimmered on the tracks, and a pale mist drifted up from the river below the old viaduct, where smoke had once blackened the sky. Now the air was calm, fragile with the silence that follows long nights of fire and sirens. The echoes of chaos had faded into the rhythm of recovery, a rhythm marked by the steady hum of life returning to the town. At the small brick hospital, the world had slowed into warmth and whispers. The scent of disinfectant was overpowered by coffee, and sunlight filtered through half-drawn blinds, cutting across the pale blue walls. Elaine Carter sat on the edge of a hospital bed, her arms wrapped tightly around her daughter's. She was 38, tall but slender, with chestnut hair that framed a face marked by exhaustion and grace. Her once steady accountant's hands now trembled slightly as they brushed strands of blonde from June's forehead. The faint bruise on her temple told of struggle, but her blue-gray eyes carried something stronger, resilience born from sleepless nights and years of raising 2 children alone. Across from her stood Cole Bennett, the same uniform from the night before, now wrinkled and flecked with ash. His rugged face bore the wear of fatigue, yet his gaze remained calm, grounded. He held his cap against his chest, uncertain whether to smile or stay silent. Beside him, Coda sat alert but serene, the morning light catching the polished brass of the new leather collar around his neck. The plate gleamed with fresh engraving. Rail Guardian. Elaine looked at the collar, her lips trembling into a small smile. "You really named him that?" Cole shook his head softly. "The town did. I just made sure he earned it." June reached out a small hand toward the dog, giggling faintly as Coda's tail brushed the floor in a slow wag. Lily, the older sister, leaned into her mother's shoulder, voice barely audible. "Is it over, Mama?" Elaine pressed her lips to her daughter's hair. "Yes, sweetheart, it's over now." But as she spoke, her eyes met Cole's, and in that unspoken look hung the truth they both knew. Some endings only lived on paper. Nurse Margaret Doyle entered quietly, her silver hair pinned neatly beneath her cap. She carried a clipboard and a soft smile that felt like home. "Your vitals are good, Mrs. Carter," she said, glancing at the readings. "Doctor says you're clear to leave by noon. The sheriff's office is arranging your escort." Elaine nodded faintly. "I just want to take my girls home." "You will," Cole said, voice low, "and this time it'll be safe." Margaret hesitated, then turned to Cole. "They're waiting for you outside, at the station. Mayor's setting up the ceremony." He grimaced. "Ceremony?" The nurse chuckled. Seems you and that dog of yours turned into Bitterroot's favorite. Headline. Cole sighed. That's not why I signed up. But Margaret only smiled knowingly. Heroes never do. Outside, the town gathered near the old station, where red, white, and blue bunting hung over the weathered timbers. The building had been boarded up for years, but today it seemed alive again. Children perched on railings, shop owners wrapped in scarves, their faces brightened by relief and gratitude. Snow crunched under boots as the morning train's whistle echoed through the valley, a sound that had once carried fear, now transformed into music of homecoming. Mayor Evelyn Grant, a dignified woman in her early 60s, stood at the podium. She had short silver hair, warm brown eyes, and the sturdy posture of someone who'd spent decades keeping small-town politics afloat. Her tailored gray coat contrasted with the rustic platform beneath her boots. Today, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chilly air, we gather not just to honor bravery, but to remind ourselves that courage often looks like a man, a dog, and a moment of decision. The crowd murmured in agreement, applause rippling softly. Cole stood beside Marla Green, who, despite the bruise on her cheek and the fatigue lining her face, looked as composed as ever. Her auburn hair was tucked under her cap, and her posture was rigid, as if emotion were something she refused to let show in public. Evelyn continued. Last night, this town faced a danger it did not understand: fire, deceit, and a betrayal that ran through the very rails that built Bitterroot. But in that darkness, Officer Bennett and Coda acted with faith and courage, saving lives and uncovering truth that others tried to bury. A murmur ran through the crowd. Elaine stood with her daughters near the front, her eyes glistening as she clutched their hands. The mayor turned toward Cole and lifted a small velvet box from the podium. Inside gleamed a medal etched with the town's crest, a train wheel encircled by a laurel wreath. On behalf of Bitterroot, I present this to you, Officer Bennett, for valor in the line of duty. Cole accepted it, but before she could pin it, he stepped toward the microphone. His voice carried not with pride, but with quiet conviction. I appreciate this more than I can say, he began, but I didn't do this alone. He looked down at Coda, whose ears twitched at his name. This dog heard something none of us could, not just sounds, but the fear that hides between them. He followed it through fire and smoke when I couldn't see a thing. Whatever courage I have, he had first. Laughter and applause followed, warm and genuine. Cole let it fade before continuing. And if I've learned anything, it's that none of us walk alone. God doesn't always speak in thunder. Sometimes he speaks through a partner on 4 legs, or a mother who refuses to give up, or a town that still believes in what's right. The mayor's eyes softened as she pinned the medal to his chest. Then let it remind us all, she said quietly, that light comes back, even after fire. The crowd applauded again. Snowflakes began to drift lazily from the sky, glinting in the morning sun like falling stars. Elaine stepped forward, her daughters clinging to her sides. She looked up at Cole, voice trembling but steady. If not for you, if not for him, I would have lost everything. Cole shook his head. No, Mrs. Carter. You didn't lose. You fought. You're the reason your girls are alive. You started this by telling the truth. We just followed where it led. Sometimes God doesn't send angels with wings. He sends them with paws, courage, and loyal hearts. The true miracle wasn't just saving 2 children from fire, but reminding us that faith still burns even in ashes. In every act of kindness, in every quiet moment of courage, His light still shines. If this story touched your heart, share it, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories of faith and redemption. May God bless you and your family. and may His small miracles follow you every day.